Good evening. I'm Yulia Carter, Assistant City Manager and Administrative Services Director. And the item before you tonight is fiscal year 2021 mid-year budget review. Throughout this presentation, we will briefly talk about the mid-year objectives, the methodology. We will discuss general fund revenues and expenditures and fund balances, and also touch base on other funds, revenues, expenditures, and fund balances. Before we dive into the analysis, I have this summary slide for you, and we have good news and not so good news for you today. The good news are in general fund. The general fund is doing quite well. Operating revenues are increased by about 600,000 or 4% compared to adopted budget. The operating expenditures also increased, but remain within the normal course of operations. It's also a 4% increase from the adopted budget. And the best news is that undesignated fund balance of general fund increased by 1.6 million from 1.8 or 10% of operating expenses at adoption to 3.4 or 18% at mid-year. And this is after factoring in one-time transfers to eliminate deficit in other funds. What is not so good is the decline in revenues in other unrestricted funds, specifically parking, MLK, and Old City Hall, that the city traditionally used these funds to balance the general fund budget. This report shows that the fund balances in Old City Hall and Parking Fund are significantly reduced and will not be able to absorb any significant transfers to general fund in the new year. We knew that when we used these fund balances to help balance the general fund deficit last fiscal year, but now it's becoming a reality that needs to be addressed and calls for some new strategies for the upcoming year. The mid-year budget process is the industry standard. The purpose of it is to conduct analysis of year-to-date revenues and expenditures and review assumptions that were made before the budget cycle and update the council on the status of revenues, expenditures, fund balances, and made any necessary adjustments. Before we again get too deep into the analysis, I just want to touch base on the methodology for the mid-year budget review. We used the data from the last available quarter, that was Q2 that we closed and presented you a financial report at the last council meeting. So we used the Q2 that closed in December 2020 to prepare this report. As a step 2, we went back to the beginning of the fiscal year to review and capture all previously approved council actions that may have modified the budget year to date. And finally, as step number 3, we made the year-end estimates in all operating and revenues expenditures within each budget unit. Typically, during this exercise, all estimates in excess of adopted budget by 5% of 30,000 would be considered material in nature to trigger adjustments. This slide provides a big picture view of the city's 2021 projections across all funds citywide. The citywide revenues remain flat, as you can see on the left, with the marginal increase of 21,000. The citywide expenditures increased by 2.7 million or 8%, but again, this is mostly due to previously approved and some of the previously approved and scheduled capital spendings. We will dive into the details of these estimates over the next few slides, but I want to bring your attention to the little chart in blue in the middle. As you can see, this shows the nature and the core of all the mid-year adjustments. This chart represents the total impact of the mid-year adjustments, and you can see the majority of changes are actually in other funds. So the general fund is showing very normal growth with of under 5%, which is what we typically want to see at mid-year. But the other funds are showing significant drop in revenues. So you can see it circled in red, 1.3 million drop, and most of this is in parking fund. There is some increase in expenditures, but again, this is budgeted and well, this was a scheduled expenditures in the capital improvement program specifically. And little stack in the block and in purple, those are our transfers between the funds. Now let's take a closer look at general fund revenues. The blue columns represent the adopted budget, the green revised budget, and you can see that the general fund revenues are doing quite well comparing to the budget. We projected the property taxes conservatively, so we are happy to report that our assumptions that there will be a number of reassessment claims filed this fiscal year and approved by the county. So we are pleased to report that these assumptions did not materialize, and the property tax revenues showed the normal increase and normal projections. So we adjusting this budget by 300,000 because of that. The sales tax revenues are also showing increase. Based on our discussions with HTL, the city's sales tax advisor, the local sales activities forecast much better than expected. And this is mostly due to online sales and increase in yacht and boat sales. So we factored this in and added additional 150,000 in projected revenues. The next category, other revenues, are showing decrease of 127,000. And this is mostly because of the shared services agreements with the city of Mill Valley and Fire District for Department of Public Works and admin staff that we included in the original budget did not turn out quite as planned, so we were not able to utilize those revenues that we included in the budget originally. Charges for services show a modest increase of 28,000. This is a combination of increase in building and planning activity that were unfortunately offset by a drop in parks and recreation fees and rentals. Other taxes represent our business license tax. And again, the good news here that we are showing some increase in estimates. That's pretty much proves that our drop at the mid-year was quite conservative. I believe we reduced this budget by about 25%. So again, happy to report that we are putting 17% back, or 190,000. But I still want to point out that this is a significant decline of nearly 500,000 over the last year's actuals. And obviously direct reflection on the stressed business community and local economy. And finally, TOT, the transit occupancy tax, used to be the city's third largest revenue source. Well, clearly not anymore because of the pandemic. And unfortunately, as we all know, the hospitality industry was most affected by the pandemic. The 2021 adopted budget included nearly 0.8 million loss in, it's over 57% loss in comparing to the prior year's TOTs. And obviously this is due to significant drop in travel and tourism activity. Even though this revenue is still showing a significant drop and decline comparing to historic figures, we are really pleased to report that our year-end estimates are projected to improve a little bit, and we factored in an additional 53,000 or 8% compared to the budget projections. This is the same data presented a little bit differently. You can see a little bit more granular breakdown on revenue categories. And all of these categories are described in the staff report. Now let's talk about general fund expenditures. We typically report in expenditures in these 4 categories: salaries and benefits, contractual services, materials and supply, and transfers. We are projecting some salary savings created by vacancies and the extension of the hiring freeze. This is approximately 200,000 this year. And as we all know, we had unusually high vacancy rate this year and the number of retirements. Typically, we wouldn't recommend reducing the personnel budget due to salary savings because it could create some misrepresentation of personnel cost. But again, given that we are continuing dealing with the pandemic situation, losses and revenues, we factored this savings in to offset some of the increases that you can see in contractual services. The increase in other categories, mostly due to previously approved council actions, all of them included in attachment 3. And we also factored in 2 adjustments in legal services and utilities budget, and we'll talk about it on the next slides. And finally, the increase in transfers out represent one-time transfers to traffic safety and general liability funds. And again, we'll discuss it in just the next few slides. Again, the same data presented in a different format. Yes, different people read the information a little bit differently and like to see charts or tables or graphs. So we included both. And here's again all the adjustments or requested general fund expense adjustments that we're asking you to approve today. Again, as I mentioned, the salary savings is one of them. That's about 200,000. The previously approved amendments, they were already approved by council. Just for informational purposes, we listed them again in attachment 3, and we captioned and factored them in the budget review. And the staff adjustments that we're asking you to approve, increase in legal services of 228,000 to address the increase in outside legal counsel and city attorney costs related to various legal matters, including encampment and claims. And after we published this report, it came to our attention that some of this projected increase could be slightly overstated. And again, just want to point out that any unused portion, if the legal cost comes less than we are projecting here, any unused portion of it will simply fall back into the fund balance reserves at the end of the year. The second category is utility budget increase. So that budget was reduced at the budget adoption. So we actually projected to generate about 100,000 in savings during the budget in anticipations of reduced water and sewer usage for city facilities and decreased water distribution to medians, parks, and fields. Yet, unfortunately, the projected actuals show that we need to restore this budget back. We factored in an increase in water and sewer budget, and the projections are showing that we need this 102,000 to put back in the budget for additional water and sewer hookup charges that we used for newly constructed Dunphy Park, as well as additional water usage for grassy area. The last category is one-time transfers to cover deficit in two city funds, traffic safety and general liability. Traffic safety fund accounts for projects related to traffic safety, repairs of traffic signals. Right now, the only revenue source in this fund is a vehicle code fines, which is quite unreliable revenue stream and typically does not cover the annual expenditures for this purpose. So we've traditionally results in some running deficit in the fund. That's why we are building an additional general fund transfer of 205,000 to cover the traffic safety fund balance deficit. And moving forward, we want to start building annual transfer from general fund to the fund to supplement the vehicle code fines to cover anticipated expenditures. And the second transfer is to general liability fund. This fund accounts for all expenses related to the risk management programs, including insurance premiums, legal, and other costs related to managing liability claims. This is an internal service fund, which means that all the services are provided on cost reimbursement basis by one fund or department to another. And in the past 2 years, we accumulated some deficit in these funds due to several large claim payments under the city's self-insured retention. And over 2 years, we accumulated a deficit of 469,000. And since the general fund improved its balance over at the last fiscal year, we asking you to approve additional transfer to cover this deficit in the fund. To conclude our analysis of the general fund, let's take a look at the estimated general fund balances projected through the rest of the fiscal year. The total general fund balance of 11.1 million, of which 3.4 is unassigned. And you can see this is an increase of about 1.6 million comparing to the adopted level of 1.8 million. So we increased from 10% to 18% of the operating expenditures, which is really good news. And I also want to bring your attention that we closed the previous year at a much better note. You can see that before the fiscal year was closed, we projected that the ending fund balance will be 9.2 million, but we actually ended the year at 11.7 million in the general fund, which also contributed to our to the increase in the undesignated fund balance. The council previously adopted a policy to commit contingency reserves of 5% of operating expenditures to budget stabilization, another 10% to the shortfall policy. And last year as well, you may remember the council set aside a COVID-19 designation of 1.5 million. That equals 2 months of revenue losses. And the great news that all these contingency reserves remain the same. We didn't have to make any adjustments to any of them, which is another indication that the scenario that we put in place, the middle scenario for general fund, is actually still our working scenario. And also, please keep in mind that the beginning fund balance in general fund was updated again to 11.7 million to reflect the audited balance at the fiscal year end. And that's another good news that we finished the year at a much better note that we expected when the budget was adopted. The undesignated fund balance of 3.4 million, again, represents about 18% of general fund operating expenditures, which is within the GFOA recommended guidelines of at least 2 months of operating expenditures. And once again, this is a very good indicator that the city has taken the turn into the right direction, hopefully, as we start recovering from the pandemic. And I also want to give a credit to the past city council for fiscally responsible leadership and putting this last budget together, and as well as all city departments for keeping the operations within the reduced budget means. I know it wasn't easy for any of us. Oops. Sorry about that. So now let's look at non-general fund funds. So first, let's take a look at status of other funds revenues. The non-general fund revenues are projected to decrease 573,000, and you can see that the majority of this decrease is in enterprise funds, as I already mentioned before. So the 3 large decreases here in this category are decrease in Old City Hall revenues of about 175,000, decrease in MLK by about 240,000, and both of them are related to rent relief program and reduction in rent revenue receipts. But the biggest cause of this decline is additional loss of about $1 million from 2.3 million down to 1.3 million in parking revenues. And that's a direct reflection again on the pandemic and a result of COVID-19, and the reflection of decrease in usage of all 4 city halls, city parking lots, bicycle parking revenues, meter collections, and parking permits. The special revenue funds show a little bit of increase. The capital revenues increased by 160,000. 100,000 of it is additional contribution from Measure O that was approved by Council earlier in the year, and 60,000 is related to donations to the Southview Park project. We're showing some decrease in the Tidelands revenues and a little bit of increase in the traffic safety revenues, again due to transfers from general fund. And we also recorded additional revenues in disaster assistance fund to account for receipt of FEMA reimbursement from the prior year. And finally, in internal service fund, you can see again general fund liability increase is related to the one-time transfer that we already discussed from the general fund. Now let's look at the other funds expenditures. We factored in additional expenditures decrease in enterprise funds to offset some of the decrease in revenues. We reduced the MLK maintenance, reduced the parking fund expenditures related to bicycle parking and labor and related fees. We also made some adjustments to disaster assistance fund. There were some additional expenses related to mudslide repairs, but again, they were offset by the FEMA revenues that we received and recorded as part of the revenues. And for the general capital fund expenditures, we will review them in details as part of the budget development. And I know Public Works Director is working on reviewing those expenditures and making sure that all capital projects previously approved by council are rolled over into the 5-year capital plan. Now, if all the changes that we discussed so far were approved by you tonight, here are the projected citywide fund balance summary. The city currently has 24 funds that are grouped in these categories, and you can find additional information on all individual fund balances in attachment 7 to your staff report. And the city fund balances across all funds are projected to be 23.4 million, which is not bad, but we definitely need to keep an eye on those revenue losses in enterprise funds and all unrestricted funds for the upcoming fiscal year. Now, to summarize everything that we discussed so far, general fund is doing quite well and projecting a healthy increase in revenues and slight increase in expenditures. But again, all of this is within the close margin of the adopted budget. The designated fund balance in general fund increased as well, which is excellent news. So we gained additional 1.6 million to 3.4 million at mid-year comparing to what we projected at the adoption. And although the general fund is showing signs of improvement, we do need to keep an eye on losses of revenues in other funds, including parking, MLK, and Old City Hall, as they are showing real threat that might limit the city's ability to use these funds to balance the general fund in 21-22. That brings us to recommendation or motion. So we are asking you to adopt a resolution that is in your packet tonight to adjust the 2021 operating and capital budget and factor in the net increase in revenue projections by 21,300 to the total of 31,000. Increase appropriation by 2.7 million or 8%, and include the one-time transfers of net 774 from the general fund to traffic safety and general liability fund. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.